Sometimes you don't realize how lucky you are until you see just how close you came to disappearing. I learned that the hard way, one cold night in the middle of nowhere, back when I still thought hitchhiking was just another way to get by. A few years ago, I was hitchhiking across the Midwest. I didn't have much money, and my old car had given up on me a couple of states back. Hitchhiking wasn't new to me. It wasn't glamorous, but it got me where I needed to go. Most people who picked me up were kind, or at least indifferent, and I'd never had any real trouble. That was until one night when I got into the wrong car. It was late October, and the sun had set hours ago. I was somewhere in Kansas walking along a desolate highway with my thumb out. The air was crisp, and the road was empty except for the occasional passing truck. I'd been walking for what felt like miles, my boots kicking up dust as I tried to stay warm. Finally, I saw a pair of headlights in the distance. I stepped off the shoulder and stuck out my thumb, praying this one would stop. To my relief, the car slowed and pulled over about 20 feet ahead of me. It was an old sedan, the kind with peeling paint, and a loud engine that sputtered as it idled. I jogged up to the passenger window, which was rolled down halfway. The driver leaned over to look at me. He was a man in his late 40s or early 50s, with greasy hair and a hollow look in his eyes. He wore a faded flannel shirt and had a cigarette dangling from his lips. "Need a ride?" he asked, his voice raspy. "Yeah, thanks," I replied, trying not to sound too desperate. I hesitated for a split second, but told myself I was just being paranoid. It was cold, and I was exhausted. I opened the door and slid into the passenger seat, setting my backpack at my feet. The inside of the car smelled faintly of gasoline and sweat. "Where you headed?" he asked, pulling back onto the road. "Just trying to get to the next town," I said. "Anywhere with a gas station or diner would be fine." He nodded, his eyes fixed on the road. The silence between us felt heavy, but I was too tired to make small talk. Instead, I stared out the window, watching the dark fields blur past. After a few minutes, he spoke again. "You do this often, hitchhiking." "Yeah, sometimes," I admitted. "Not really by choice, though." He chuckled a low, humorless sound. "Gotta be careful out here. Not everyone's friendly." "Yeah, I know," I said, forcing a nervous laugh. The way he said it made my stomach tighten. I glanced at him out of the corner of my eye. He was gripping the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white. His cigarette had burned down to the filter, but he didn't seem to notice. The silence stretched on, and the atmosphere in the car grew more uncomfortable with every passing mile. I tried to shake the feeling of unease, telling myself it was just my imagination. But then I noticed something strange. He hadn't asked where I was coming from. He hadn't asked about my story, my plans, nothing. Most drivers at least tried to make small talk, but he seemed uninterested. It was like he didn't care who I was or why I was there. The thought made me uneasy. Then he took a turn onto a narrow dirt road. Where are we going?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. "Shortcut," he said without looking at me. I stared at the road ahead. It wasn't a shortcut, it was a barely visible path cutting through a field. There were no lights, no signs, no indication that it led anywhere. My pulse quickened. "I thought we were heading to the next town," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We are," he said. "Just relax." My instincts were screaming at me now. I glanced down at my backpack where I kept a small pocket knife, but it was wedged between my feet too far to grab without drawing attention. My heart pounded as I tried to think of a way out. "Actually, I think I'll just walk the rest of the way," I said, reaching for the door handle. The car slowed slightly, but he didn't stop. Instead, he turned to me, his face lit by the dim glow of the dashboard lights. His expression was cold. "It's not safe out here," he said. "You shouldn't be walking alone." "I'll take my chances," I said, forcing a smile. "Thanks for the ride, though." He stared at me for a moment, his grip on the wheel tightening. Then, without warning, he slammed on the brakes. The car skidded to a stop, kicking up dust. My seatbelt dug into my chest as I was thrown forward. "Get out," he said, his voice low and dangerous. I didn't need to be told twice. I fumbled with the door handle, grabbed my backpack, and stumbled out of the car. The moment I was clear, he sped off the tail lights, disappearing into the darkness. I stood there shaking, trying to catch my breath. The road was pitch black, and the only sound was the faint rustle of the wind. I had no idea where I was or how far I'd have to walk to reach the next town. I eventually made it to a gas station. Hours later, my feet blistered and my nerves shot. When I told the clerk about the man, he gave me a strange look. "You're lucky," he said. "There've been stories about a guy like that around here. Picks people up, takes them out into the middle of nowhere. Not all of them come back." I didn't stay to ask questions. I called a friend to pick me up and swore I'd never hitchhike again. To this day, I don't know what the driver's intentions were, but I'll never forget the look in his eyes when he told me to relax. You ever have one of those nights you think about years later and still get chills? This is one of mine. This happened a few years ago when I was driving back home after visiting my parents. It was late, probably close to midnight, and I was on a stretch of highway that cut through miles of farmland. The road was long and empty, with only the occasional set of headlights passing by in the opposite direction. It was the kind of quiet that makes your thoughts louder, and I was already starting to regret leaving so late. About an hour into the drive, I spotted something up ahead. A figure was walking along the shoulder of the highway, illuminated briefly by my headlights. As I got closer, I saw it was a man, probably in his mid-30s, wearing a faded jacket and jeans. His hand was out, thumb raised, in the universal signal for hitchhiking. I'm not the kind of person who picks up hitchhikers. I've heard too many stories, watched too many movies, but something about this man made me pause. Maybe it was the fact that the highway was so empty, or the thought of leaving someone stranded in the middle of nowhere. Against my better judgment, I slowed down and pulled over. He jogged up to the car, his face partially shadowed in the dim light. "Thanks for stopping," he said. His voice was steady but quiet. "I just need a ride to the next town." I hesitated, but I unlocked the door. "Hop in," I said, trying to sound casual. He climbed into the passenger seat, setting a small backpack on his lap. Up close, he looked tired, his face pale, dark circles under his eyes. "I appreciate this," he said as I pulled back onto the highway. "No problem," I replied, though my stomach was already tight with unease. The silence in the car was heavy, broken only by the hum of the engine. I turned on the radio, hoping it would make things less awkward. For a while, he didn't say much. He just stared out the window, his hands gripping the straps of his backpack. I tried to make small talk. "So, where are you headed?" "Just the next town," he said, not looking at me. "You from around here?" I pressed. He shook his head. "No, just passing through." His vague answers didn't help my nerves. I focused on the road, the tension growing with every mile. Something about him felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it. I told myself I was overthinking things, but I couldn't shake the feeling. After a few minutes, he finally broke the silence. You ever think about how dangerous it is to pick up a stranger? The question caught me off guard. I laughed nervously, gripping the steering wheel tighter. I guess so. But you seemed like you needed help. He turned to look at me, then his gaze sharp, unsettling. A lot of bad people out there. You never know who you're letting into your car. I swallowed hard, forcing another laugh. Well, I like to think most people are good. He didn't respond. He just turned back to the window, his expression unreadable. The silence that followed was unbearable. My mind raced with scenarios, each worse than the last. I kept sneaking glances at him, trying to gauge his intentions. He was still gripping his backpack. I couldn't tell if he was nervous or just waiting for something. After what felt like an eternity, I saw a sign for a gas station up ahead. Relief flooded through me. I'll drop you off here, I said, my voice a little too eager. He didn't respond at first. Then slowly he nodded. All right. I pulled into the gas station lot, stopping near the pumps. The place was nearly empty, just a lone pickup truck parked by the convenience store. Good luck, I said, forcing a smile. He opened the door and climbed out, slinging his backpack over one shoulder. But before he closed the door, he leaned down and looked at me, his expression blank, but his eyes cold. Be careful who you stop for, he said. Then he shut the door and walked away, disappearing around the side of the building. I sat there for a moment, my hands shaking as I gripped the wheel. Something about the way he said those words sent a chill through me. I didn't wait to see what he did next. I pulled out of the lot and drove fast back onto the highway, my heart pounding the entire way home. The next morning, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd narrowly avoided something terrible. I decided to do a quick search online, typing in the name of the highway and hitchhiker. What I found made my blood run cold. A few weeks earlier, a man had been found dead in his car on that same stretch of highway. The police suspected foul play, and witnesses reported seeing a hitchhiker matching the description of the man I'd picked up. I called the police and told them everything. They took my statement, but I never heard back. To this day, I don't know if the man I picked up was connected to the murder or if he was just trying to scare me. I haven't stopped for a hitchhiker since. There's a story I don't tell often. Not because I've forgotten it, but because I still think about it. Every time I see an empty road at dusk. If you've ever driven alone at night, maybe you'll understand. A couple of years ago, I was on a road trip to visit my sister, who lived about 500 miles away. I'd just gotten a new car, and I figured the drive would be the perfect way to break it in. I planned to split the trip into 2 days, stopping overnight at a cheap motel along the way. Most of the route was highway, but there was a stretch of rural back roads I had to take to cut through a less traveled area. I was on the second day of my drive, cruising through one of those long, empty stretches of road where you can go miles without seeing another car. The sun was setting, casting an orange glow over the fields and trees that seemed to stretch on forever. I didn't mind the isolation, it was peaceful in a way. About an hour before dusk, I saw someone walking along the shoulder of the road. It was a man, maybe in his late 20s or early 30s, wearing a faded flannel shirt and jeans. He had a backpack slung over one shoulder and was holding out his thumb. Normally, I wouldn't even think about picking up a hitchhiker. Too many horror stories, too many risks. But something about this guy seemed different. He didn't look threatening, more like someone down on his luck. And it was starting to get dark. I figured if I were in his shoes, I'd want someone to help me out too. Against my better judgment, I slowed down and rolled down the passenger window. "Need a ride?" I asked. "Yeah, if you don't mind," he said, his voice calm but slightly hoarse. "Just going up the road a bit." I nodded. "Hop in." He climbed into the passenger seat, setting his backpack between his feet. Up close, he looked even more tired than I'd first thought. His face was pale, and there were dark circles under his eyes. He gave me a small, grateful smile. "Thanks. Not many people stop these days." "Yeah, well," I said, trying to sound casual. "Guess I'm feeling generous." We drove in silence for a while. The only sounds were the hum of the engine and the faint music playing from the radio. I glanced at him a few times, trying to get a read on him. He just stared straight ahead, his hands resting on his lap. Something about his stillness unnerved me, but I tried to push the thought away. "So where are you headed?" I asked, breaking the silence. "Nowhere in particular," he replied, his eyes still fixed on the road ahead. "Just trying to get away." That answer didn't exactly put me at ease, away from what he didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter. "Just away." I decided not to press him. Instead, I focused on the road, watching as the trees on either side grew denser. The sun had dipped below the horizon now, and the fading light made the road ahead look endless. After a few more minutes, he spoke again. "You ever hear about the hitchhiker's curse?" I glanced at him, confused. "The what?" "It's this old story," he said, his eyes still locked on the road. "They say if you pick up the wrong hitchhiker, you'll never make it to your destination." I forced a laugh, though my chest felt tight. "Well, that's comforting." "It's just a story," he said, his tone almost apologetic. "But it makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many people pick up someone they shouldn't?" I didn't know how to respond to that. The atmosphere in the car felt heavier now, the silence between us more oppressive. I turned up the radio slightly, hoping to ease the tension. We drove for another 20 minutes without speaking. The road had become even darker, the only light coming from my headlights. Every now and then I'd glance at him out of the corner of my eye. He was completely still, his hands clenched into fists on his lap. "Hey, where exactly do you want me to drop you off?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Anywhere here is fine," he said, his voice flat. "Just pull over." Relieved, I slowed the car and pulled onto the shoulder. The area was completely deserted, just trees and darkness as far as I could see. The man grabbed his backpack and opened the door. But before he got out, he turned to look at me. "Thanks for the ride," he said. His expression was unreadable, his tone devoid of emotion. "Drive safe." I nodded quickly. "Yeah, no problem." He stepped out and shut the door behind him. I watched in the rearview mirror as he stood there on the side of the road, staring after the car as I drove away. My hands were shaking, but I told myself it was over. I'd helped him, and now I could put it behind me. But a few miles down the road, something strange happened. The air in the car felt wrong. It was colder, heavier, and there was a faint smell, something metallic, like blood. I checked the vents, thinking maybe the AC was acting up, but they were off. Then I glanced in the rearview mirror. He was sitting in the back seat. My heart stopped. I slammed on the brakes, skidding to a stop in the middle of the road. When I turned around, the back seat was empty. My chest heaved as I tried to catch my breath, my mind racing to make sense of what I'd just seen. I sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel and staring into the darkness. Finally, I put the car in gear and drove as fast as I could to the nearest town. When I checked into a motel that night, I locked the door and didn't sleep the whole time. I felt like someone was watching me. The next morning, I searched online for anything about the hitchhiker's curse. Most of what I found was folklore urban legends about phantom hitchhikers who vanished after being picked up, but one article caught my eye. It described a stretch of road on Route 42 where several drivers had reported seeing the same man, pale, tired-looking, wearing a flannel shirt. He always asked for a ride, and those who picked him up claimed he vanished before they reached their destination. I haven't driven that route since, and I'll never pick up a hitchhiker again. People think hitchhiking is all adventure, the thrill of the open road, the kindness of strangers. But they never talk about the nights when the road goes quiet, when the darkness feels too big, and you realize you're alone with someone you probably shouldn't trust. This is one of those nights, the one ride I'll never forget. I've been hitchhiking for years. It's not something I do for fun, but when you're strapped for cash and trying to get from one place to another, you don't have many options. Most of the time, it's harmless. You get in, make some small talk, and eventually part ways. But there's one ride, I'll never forget, one that made me question if I'd ever hitchhike again. It was late September, a cold night in the middle of nowhere. I'd been dropped off on a long stretch of highway somewhere in Montana, miles from the nearest town. The sun had just set, and the temperature was dropping fast. I was wearing a thin jacket and carrying a backpack with everything I owned. I'd been walking for about an hour, and I hadn't seen a single car. Finally, a set of headlights appeared in the distance. I stuck out my thumb, hoping whoever it was would take pity on me. The car, a beat-up station wagon, slowed down and pulled over to the shoulder. I jogged up to the passenger window, and the driver leaned over to roll it down. He was an older guy, maybe in his late 50s, with graying hair and a baseball cap. His face was lined, and he had that look of someone who'd spent too much time on the road. "Need a lift?" he asked, his voice gruff. "Yeah, if you're headed north," I said. I tossed my backpack in the back seat and climbed in. The car smelled faintly of cigarettes and old upholstery. The man didn't say much at first, just kept his eyes on the road, his hands gripping the wheel tightly. I tried to break the silence. "Thanks for stopping," I said. "Not a lot of cars out tonight." He gave a short nod. "Not a lot of people either." That comment struck me as odd, but I shrugged it off. I figured he was just making conversation. We drove in silence for a while, the car's engine humming steadily. The road dark, with only the headlights cutting through the blackness. "So where you headed?" he asked eventually, his eyes still fixed on the road. "Trying to get to Spokane," I said. "Got a buddy I'm meeting there." He nodded again, his face unreadable. "Long way to go." "Yeah, but I'll get there," I said, forcing a laugh. He didn't respond. The silence stretched on, and the atmosphere in the car grew heavier. Something about the way he was gripping the wheel, the way his eyes seemed to dart to the rear view mirror every few minutes, put me on edge. I started to feel like I'd made a mistake getting in the car. "Do this often?" he asked suddenly. "Hitchhiking," I said. "Yeah, when I have to." He didn't reply right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter. "Not everyone who picks you up is safe." The way he said it made my stomach turn. What do you mean? I asked cautiously. He shrugged. You hear stories. People disappearing, some of them hitchhikers, some of them drivers. He glanced at me briefly, his expression hard to read. A lot of bad people out there. I forced a nervous laugh. Yeah, well, I try to be careful. He didn't laugh. He just stared at the road, his jaw tight. The air in the car felt colder, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. After a few more minutes, he turned off the highway onto a narrow, unlit road. My heart started pounding. Where are we going? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Shortcut, he said curtly. I didn't buy it. The road was barely more than a dirt path surrounded by thick trees on either side. There was no way this was a shortcut. My hand instinctively went to the door handle, but I knew jumping out at this speed wasn't an option. I think I'll just get out here, I said, my voice shaking slightly. I can walk the rest of the way. He didn't respond. Instead, he tightened his grip on the wheel and sped up. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what to do. The backpack in the back seat had a small knife in it, but I wasn't sure if I could reach it without him noticing. Then, out of nowhere, he slammed on the brakes. The car skidded to a stop. Before I could react, he turned to me, his face calm but his eyes dark. Get out, he said. What? I stammered. You heard me. His voice was low and even. Get out of the car. I didn't argue. I grabbed my backpack and stumbled out onto the dirt road. As soon as I was clear, he sped off, his taillights disappearing into the night. I stood there for a moment, shaking, trying to process what had just happened. I didn't know where I was or how far it was to the nearest town. Then I noticed something, a faint light in the distance coming from the direction the car had been headed. It looked like a fire, a small, flickering glow surrounded by shadowy figures. My heart sank as I realized what I was seeing. There were people down there, and from the way they were moving, it didn't look like a campfire. I turned and started walking back toward the highway as fast as I could, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't look back. I didn't want to know what would have happened if I'd stayed in that car or if he'd delivered me to whatever was waiting at that fire.